Time now for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, do you believe that the BBC is anti-British? Now, this week, the BBC apologised after one of their presenters called the Dam Busters raid, which took place during the Second World War, infamous on its 80th anniversary in May. Let's have a listen.
Still to come here on Breakfast. 80 years after 19 Lancaster bombers took part in the infamous Dam Buster raids, tonight, a special anniversary flypast will take place.
Now, you may think we're making too much of it, but the word infamous is used to describe things which are well known because of something bad. In its apology, our public service broadcaster said errors do occasionally slip through, but outrage has already been triggered with the comments on the heroic dam busters. BBC employee Gary Lineker caused controversy with his tweet comparing the government's asylum seeker policy to that of 1930s Germany. And also this year, the BBC came under fire for platforming anti-British sentiment as it chose Mae Muller as a Eurovision entry. Now, the singer has previously publicly declared that she hates this country. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, do you believe that the BBC is anti-British? I'm joined now by Dennis McShane, former Labour MP, Michael Cole, former BBC Royal Correspondent, Martin Campbell, former Chief Advisor to Ofcom, and Akhil Ahmed, former Head of Religion and Ethics at the BBC. Well, Akhil, I'll start with you. Akhil? Oh, we've just lost Akhil. We'll try and get him back. Let's go with Martin then. Martin, you're a former Chief Advisor to Ofcom. Do you feel that the BBC has got a bit, they've turned a little bit anti-British?
Yeah, I do think it's anti-British, but I don't think it's quite as straightforward as that. I mean, I tend to veer towards cock-up rather than conspiracy, because I don't think the BBC are capable of organising a conspiracy. I think what they've let themselves do is to sort of sink into the swamp of wokery. I mean, probably whoever wrote on the auto cue the word infamous probably didn't know the meaning of it. Because, you know, I think the training is so bad now at the moment at the BBC. I think it's terrible.
Interesting. I was trained by the BBC. I think a lot of us here were. Michael Cole.
No, I said these days.
Oh, yeah,
these days.
It's true. It's been a few years since I've been there. Michael Cole.
This lack of patriotism was seen at its most naked 41 years ago during the Falklands War, when the BBC, in the shape of Newsnight, refused to describe the Royal Marines, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force and the Army fighting to regain these islands that were invaded by a fascist regime in Buenos Aires, refused to call them our forces. So you had Peter Snow with his sand table on Newsnight talking about the British forces doing this and that as if it was a foreign country. Well, that went down extremely badly at the time, and I was working there. I served 20 years and 3 months before the broadcasting mast. And the problem is, Nana, if you really want to look at it, that the people within the BBC have a liberal, metropolitan, ivory tower view of the world, which is inculcated within it, and anybody who stands up and says something other than that will not be preferred and will not get promotion. Now, when I joined the BBC in 1968, there were 28,000 people. I think I was one of 5 people who would have admitted to voting Conservative. Even if people were right-wing, they didn't say so. Now there's 22,000 people. The difference is, in 1968, the BBC made nearly all of its programmes. Today, it makes none of them because they're all farmed out to other companies. So what do the 22,000 people within the building do? They write memos, they have meetings, they have discussions, and these are circular discussions where they all reinforce the view that they've taken already. So you have groupthink. And what they've come up with is something which is diametrically opposed to what most of the people in this country think and feel.
Well, let's go to Dennis McShane. Dennis McShane.
I'm also, like you, Nana, like you, but a BBC guy. I remember when I got a graduate traineeship at the end of Oxford. It was the proudest day of my life. I was deeply, deeply honoured, and I love the BBC. I would actually ask, not so much as BBC anti-British, but is Britain anti-British? Because does Britain really exist anymore? We have a very narrow southern...
Yeah, no.
All right, okay. Well, it's quite important. It's quite important this. If we don't know what we stand for as a country, and we haven't now for most of this century, it's been difficult to ask the BBC to do it for us. I agree with Michael to some extent. I carried out a poll of everybody on Newsnight after the 1974 election. 23 out of 24 of the editors voted, or producers, researchers, voted Liberal, which in those days was like voting Tory. They weren't Labour. It certainly isn't a left-wing organisation. The Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, and the Spectator are the most read journals in the BBC. It's where Today gets all of its ideas from. It doesn't debate the big issues. It's killed World Service, which, when Michael and I were there, was its proudest work, promoting Britain around the world. So, and above all, it imposes this regressive tax. That means the poorest people pay a lot more than the better off people. For it's very expensively paid. I mean, Michael would dream to have the salary the presenters have today.
Yeah. Well, let's go bring in Akil.
Well, I don't think the BBC is anti-British at all. I think it's, you can disagree with the BBC, or you can disagree with certain programmes, or you can disagree with, the way it's been run, etc. But to say it's anti-British, I don't know, and it just seems a bit silly to me. I mean, on this particular story, the whole bouncing bomb thing, I think it was just a mistake, and it was a silly mistake, and actually one for somebody who grew up reading comics like Victor and Commando, etc. It kind of like, it shows you more about how people don't relate to that past. And I think that's one of the issues here, is actually, are any organisation, any media organisation, or one that's made up full of people who may be monocultural in thinking, i.e. coming from a certain socio-economic group, a cultural group, do they understand everybody's particular point of view and different perspectives and treat them equally? I think that's something I think we could have a real serious conversation about. But no one's anti-British, but they may not be fully aware of what some of the great things are about the country, but also what and how everybody thinks very differently. You don't all have to think in the same way. And I think that's the key to this story for me.
Martin, quickly, because you're shaking your head.
I think, I mean, that is right. But the problem is, I believe that people effectively are becoming institutionalised at the BBC when they join, because there's no firm hand on the tiller. You can see what's happening with Gary Lineker and Carol Vorderman. There's no adult in the room. And I think that's what's happening within the BBC.
Well, listen, anybody else? You've got a few seconds, Michael. Do you have something to say? You've got 10 seconds, Michael.
The problem is, Nana, that the BBC has a unique setup. It is set up to spend money rather than make money. So therefore, nobody ever gets sacked unless they don't pay their licence fee. Nobody will ever criticise anybody. They are within a circle. It's a circular conversation. They reinforce their mistakes. And if the woman said infamous and she didn't know what it meant, well, then it's ignorance rather than aggressiveness, isn't it?
Well, listen, thank you so much. Sorry, Dennis, no time to bring you back in. Thank goodness. No, I'm teasing you, Dennis. Thank you very much to Dennis McShane, former Labour MP, Michael Cole, former BBC royal correspondent, Martin Campbell, former chief advisor to Ofcom, and Akil Ahmed, former head of religion and ethics at the BBC.